Welcome to the Mies Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Sharkey, the founder and CEO of Mies, the culinary operating system for food professionals. On the show, I'll be interviewing world-class entrepreneurs in the food space that are shifting the paradigm of how we innovate and operate in our industry. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show.
Yo, they say art mirrors life with every stroke of the pencil. I'm giving you folks a glimpse into my experiences you could trace like a stencil.
My guest today is Shari Bayer. Shari is a publicist in the food industry, an author, a podcast host, and also a professional solo diner, which we talk about a little bit on the show. She started her career out working for Charlie Trotter, then founded her PR agency, Bayer PR, in 2003. She launched her podcast, All in the Industry, on Heritage Radio in 2014 and has interviewed hundreds of incredible chefs and hospitality professionals on the show. Most recently, almost like an extension of the podcast, Shari published her book, Chefwise, which we'll be talking a lot about today. In the book, she captures life lessons, tips, and clips from 117 of the best chefs from around the world. The book reminds me a lot of Tim Ferriss's Tribe of Mentors, and it's something that you can pick up really at any page and see insights and inspirations from really incredible chefs. I also asked Shari a lot about when the right time is to bring on PR to your restaurant, when it might not be the best time to do so, as well as just how to get the most out of your publicist team. And as always, I hope you enjoy the show as much as I did. Welcome to the Mies Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited to talk to you today. I think obviously the impetus primarily is I want to talk about your book, and I want everybody to learn about your book and the whys and whos and all that jazz. But why don't we start with the obligatory little background on yourself and how you got here today?
Who am I?
We can get existential if you want to. But...
Well, thank you for having me. And my career is all about the hospitality industry, and it wasn't a straight path, but the short bio, I guess, is I grew up in Miami, and I then went to the University of Michigan and graduated liberal arts and wasn't really exactly sure what I wanted to do. After college, I ended up moving to Chicago and working in restaurants. I was working in restaurants as soon as I could drive. When I was 16 in Miami, I got a job as a hostess at a Mexican restaurant and wanted to work and wanted to be in the industry. So I've always worked in restaurants. And in Chicago, I was an office manager at a microbrewery. I went to cooking school thinking I wanted to be a chef. And then I got a job as a server at Charlie Trotter, which was like the high end of my fine dining restaurant experience. I always did a lot of things in restaurants and with chefs, but I still wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do, like long-term career. So I ended up moving to New York in 1998 and starting in NYU's food studies program. And that led me to some introductions to people. And I had an internship at Food Arts magazine. And I did some work a little with the James Beard Foundation. I did some recipe testing and things. And then I ended up at a PR firm in 2000 called KB Network News. That was my introduction into PR for restaurants. So that's how I never studied PR. I learned PR from doing it on the job. And we were working at the time with Todd English and Bobby Flay and opening like Sushi Samba and Tao, if you were around.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I was, and I remember those vividly.
It was like a really amazing introduction into not only like the restaurant scene of New York and bar scene, like what it meant in New York City, that it's something I could do with my career to work with chefs in restaurants and help promote them. And I not necessarily be the one who had a restaurant myself or cooking or waiting tables. So
yeah,
that's kind of how I got into PR. And then I started my own company in 2003. So this year is like I'm hitting all these milestones this year, and I'm coming up on 20 years of having my company,
years.
Which is crazy.
That's nuts.
So, and I've mostly worked with chefs in restaurants over the years. I didn't grow into a big company. I still basically a one-woman show and I hire freelancers sometimes, but I love doing the work and having the relationship with my client. So, and that then led me, when I hit the 10-year mark of my company, I was sort of thinking, what should I be doing next? That's how my podcast was born, out of the idea of working in PR, knowing a lot of people in the industry who did different things than what I did. So behind the scenes talent in hospitality. And that's how I came up with the idea for All in the Industry, my podcast, which I started in 2014, which is also crazy that it was almost 10 years ago. I've had the opportunity to interview some bigger names in the industry like Danny Meyer and Massimo Bottura and Thomas Keller and Ruth Rachel. And I mean, it's kind of beyond me that I've had this opportunity, but I love interviewing people and talking to them. So I just keep going with it. And then sometimes I'm interviewing or talking to people who might be a lesser known name, but they're a talent like a Jimmy Huey who does kitchen design with restaurants.
I wanted to kind of see if we can unveil the curtain behind PR, because I know owning restaurants for a long time, I've always had misconceptions about PR, and then I've sort of turned the corner on how we get value out of it. Maybe we could chat a little bit about just like restaurant PR for a minute.
Yeah.
Because you've been doing it for 20 plus years now.
Yeah.
And what are some of like the biggest misconceptions that you think chefs and restaurant owners have about PR, of their expectation versus reality, or sort of how it works and how it doesn't work?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think it's about relationships really, and working with someone in PR that understands you and your brand. And PR is basically the middleman between the client and the media. So I feel bringing someone on board, a publicist on your team, is really representing you and like getting your message out there, or your message to the people who can write about it and cover it on different outlets. And nowadays that also includes social media, which wasn't something that was around when I started. So that shifted a lot with industry outreach and expectations. It's interesting because PR publicists still kind of get a bad rap for some reason. But we're not
Well, you know,
bad people. I mean,
no. I think my biggest learning lesson originally when I opened my first restaurants, and we had incredible publicists, really, really great ones. But by the way, shout out to Aaron Ginsberg. He's done lots of other things since then.
sure. I know Aaron from his beginning days of PR.
Yeah, First Press. And, you know, I think one of the lessons I learned was, I think there's sometimes a misconception that you hire a PR company so that you can get in the news, and that's it. And I think the biggest learning lesson, at least, and this could be right or wrong, is that like, actually it's as the owner, as the chef, you start a whole bunch of fires and you create a very clear message. And then you bring on PR to put gas on those fires, right? So if you have things that are interesting, things that are innovative, things that are breaking ground, things that are stories already, and then you bring PR on to amplify those and get them to the megaphones that will sort of get those stories to more people and crystallize the message more if you already have one. But not so much bring on PR to just get you into every publication, independent of anything that you've done. That was sort of the paradigm shift for me, which happened early on. Obviously, that was many, many years ago. With that in mind, I don't know, I'd love to get your thoughts on that if that resonates. And then when do you think is a good time for a restaurant or a chef to bring on a publicist?
The way you said that in your own words, I haven't heard it that way, but it makes sense to me. I mean, I think a lot of publicists use the word storytelling. Like, you need to tell a story. You need something to talk about or some newsworthy. I mean, new restaurant openings or a new business, new is a key word. So if you're opening a new restaurant, I mean, to the question of when to start, I usually say, depending on if you're looking for more short-term or long-term press, but a good like 4 to 6 weeks just to like get organized and ready for like a new restaurant opening, to get the press materials or the information collected so you know what you're talking about, to get good photos of your food, your restaurant, your concept, your headshot, and then you can have all that ready to go to the media with an opening launch. That's my suggestion with a new business, and that's like pretty short-term lead. But nowadays with media being online, so many outlets, that used to need a longer lead time when everything was print, but online can be pretty fast. So I don't think you need to start so early on ahead of an opening, but I would suggest someone, if you're opening a place, to bring on PR before you open for sure, because with the media, like, you're new the day, the week, the hour you open, and then it's like a couple of days later, a couple of weeks later, they're on to the next new thing. And even though at 5 months old, you're still a new business or restaurant, but in the media eyes, you're not the brand new place now. So I've had some clients or people reach out to me when they're at that 5-month mark or later, and it's harder to generate press because it's not the hot new restaurant or place to talk about. It's not impossible. I've taken those clients on, but I think just knowing what your story is and why people want to hear about your business and care about your business and come in and try your food, or because it's not just saying, oh, my cooking's the best, or it's authentic recipes, or you need more substance there to stand out.
I mean, that makes a ton of sense. Let's paint a scenario where I've been open for a year now. What's the relationship with PR then? Do I still think about hiring PR if I haven't yet? If I have PR still, how do I leverage them best to get the most out of the relationship after an opening, right? So, I think a lot of restaurants aren't always opening new locations. So what's the best way to sort of leverage PR after that?
This afternoon, I'm going to a new business meeting with a restaurant that's been open for several years. So it's not, and we'll see. I've worked with a lot of places that aren't brand new, and I have to say it is harder in a sense because like with a new opening, the media is gonna, they're right. They want to write about that. Once you're a year open, it's looking at what you were saying, even just like what's your story and what's the angle. But my company is Bayer Public Relations, but it could easily be Bayer Public Relations, marketing, consulting, social media. Like it all kind of ties together. So working with my clients to understand what their goals are and what the message is. And again, going back to the word new, I mean, so if you introduce a new dish, a new menu, a new chef, you can look at the holidays and the seasons coming up, and you kind of can look at the calendar and know a little bit of what the media might be writing about or interested in. Use that as an angle for getting some coverage.
Yeah.
But I definitely have had a lot of clients that have brought me on after they're already established. I worked years ago with Capsuto Frere when they were around, and I was working with them when they were like 31 years old. So just matter getting the story out there.
Yeah, I always felt like a little self-conscious when we're working with PR and we don't have big enough stories because it's difficult. I'm curious, are there times when you have turned down a client because you just don't know how you would help them, or are there situations when it just doesn't make sense and you just tell a client, look, I don't think PR is right for you right now?
Yeah, there definitely has been times where I've had conversations with people that aren't exactly sure what they're looking for, and so maybe it's guiding them to work and build your social media, your Instagram, or do things on your own. There's a lot, I think, owners and restaurateurs and business people in business can do on your own. And so sometimes having those conversations, because the one thing working with restaurants is the budget is tight. Yeah. Yeah. PR is, I think it works, I believe, and it's important and it's wonderful to have, but you don't need it to operate your business. Like you need to have food and you need to have electricity and you need to have staff. It's more of a bonus. I mean, a lot of my client list will change through a year or years because not everyone can keep PR on full time all the time.
Well, you mentioned that the other things that you do for clients, marketing, consultative things like that. I have to imagine social media has totally shifted the paradigm of how PR even works nowadays, meaning like getting a hit on Instagram or something that has 1 million views may have a bigger impact than an eater or something that comes out. Like how has social media changed the way that you run PR?
Well, yeah, it has changed things. It's like added to the mix, I guess. Social media, I think Instagram has been the one that the restaurant community has been most drawn to because it's photos. But I've always told my clients over the years, I know this change is going on with Twitter, but like get on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, like at least establish your profile on there, and so people can tag you and in a sense do PR marketing for you. But social media, I mean, the influencers, they've become a part of the mix as part of PR. It depends on, every client's a little different with what they're looking for and the messaging. But I do reach out a lot to social media influencers who have an understanding and a following of the restaurant industry and food and chefs, and oftentimes invite them in to experience a restaurant or tell a story on their social media platform. So yeah, I think social media has just kind of now become a part of the media outreach, and it's about relationships as well. So it's not, I don't know, I'm not a publicist that just sends out email blasts to everyone and it's a free for all, I guess you'd say. It's more like knowing specifically like what writers, having a relationship with them, knowing their backgrounds, knowing what the might be interest of them in telling a story. And I think it's the same with social media influencers, just kind of understanding like what their angle is and how they're going to go in and cover a restaurant and what the voice is. And I think that every restaurant and client I have, it's a little different with what they're looking for and what their brand is. So I try to be, specific, working with influencers and media tell their story.
Yeah, I'm sure this podcast is a nice little addition to all the things that you do. You mentioned how it started, but like, what's the like objective of the podcast? Do you have like a goal in mind of like what listeners should be getting out of the all in the industry? Called All in the Industry.
Yes,
right?
called All in the Industry. I'm thinking I want to ask you the same question right now.
Well, I'm happy
to
answer that, but obviously I'm selfishly going to learn a little bit here. But like, you've been doing, I think the last saw like 350 some odd episodes, and name a chef they've been on there, name a restaurant where they've probably been on there. Like, what's the goal when you have these guests on? What are you hoping that listeners get out of it? What are you hoping the guest gets out of it? What are you hoping that you get out of it?
So funny because it's like you say, I've had everyone on, but there's so many people I want to have on that I haven't had on yet. And so I think that's why I keep going. I don't know. I started it I call it a passion project because I just love the industry and it's just something in me. It's like my work-life balance. There isn't. It's just my work and it's all tied together. So I do the show. I mean, I think it's a little selfishly, like I want to hear people's stories and I like talking to them. And I mean, the goal is to behind the scenes talent in hospitality, to share stories of people who work in the industry that might not get a ton of exposure. Maybe they have done a lot of interviews, but it's kind of getting a more personal angle of like what brought them into the industry, what drives them, why they do what they do, and hopefully inspires other people, whether it's someone who does do kitchen design or someone who does do a cocktail program, but to inspire other people to do things that maybe they do in the industry, or even just get them motivated about life and work in itself, maybe if it's not specifically to do exactly what they do. I like doing it. I like hearing their stories, and I feel it's a great platform to have a podcast to talk to people. And I purposely did the show 45 minutes to an hour when I started, because one thing even as a publicist, like when you see me getting a TV hit or, a segment for your client on TV is amazing. But when you watch TV segments, usually they're like 4 minutes and it goes boom, 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 hi, bye. And there's like, no, it's barely time to have a conversation. So I was like, I wanted to have a show where there was time to have a conversation. So most of my show, as you know, because you've been a guest on my show, is the conversation with the guest and hearing their background, what they do today and what inspires them. But then I also have all these bits on my show. I tip it off with a PR tip. I talk industry news. I have my speed round. I have my solo dining experience. So the show is packed with information and it's a lot, but I feel I don't know. I keep going with it because I like doing it, and I feel the feedback I've gotten has been great as well. I think people enjoy hearing other people's stories, and as I said, some bigger names, but also some lesser known names in the industry.
Yeah, it's so funny. It really is sort of like an extension and another medium of everything that you already do, right? You're telling stories of folks in the industry and as well as like the things that you bring to the industry. But I totally agree. At least for me, I struggle with the business case for my podcast because for me, it's just selfishly, I get to like chat with folks and learn and also just shout out people that I really love and want to get their name out there, although everybody's name is already out there. So I love just the idea of learning. Like today, I get to pick your brain about PR and about your podcast. And so it is a little bit selfish, but obviously it seems like yours just keeps growing. Any like really memorable moments from the show of your last like 350 or so podcasts where you're like, I still think about that to this day?
So many. I mean,
Oh, let's preface this, by the way, because whenever like I get this kind of question, I always feel like I'm going to alienate everybody else. It's like, let's preface it by, in no order, just if one comes to mind, doesn't mean there aren't plenty of others that are. But
as a publicist, for me, I mean, I had Florence Fabricant on my show. And
low fab.
Since the pandemic, things changed a little. I was doing all my shows live. I don't know if you know this or people know this. Up until the pandemic, 4:00 on Wednesdays, the show was, I went out to Brooklyn in our studio in the backyard of Roberta's and did my show live. So my shows still today, because I'm not doing them all live, but I don't really edit the show. It's really just a raw conversation. So Florence came out to Brooklyn and with her husband, and it was a hot summer day and we were there, and I was a little nervous about it. Here I am. I'm going to talk to Florence Fabricant from the New York Times, and this doesn't go well. This might hurt my heart.
If people don't know Florence Fabricant, she writes for the New York Times. She's an institution there. She's also like no BS.
Yeah.
There's no like BSing faux fab.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that conversation kept you on your toes.
Spoiler alert, it went well and we had a really nice conversation, and still working with her PR wise, when I have things to tell her about. So that was a big one for me. I mean, Ruth Reichel coming out too, another like big name writer. And then Chefwise. It's
there you go.
Mentioned Massimo, I got opportunity to interview him, Thomas Keller, David Kinch recently. And I travel with my show too, because like I was out in Los Angeles earlier this year and I did an interview with Nikki Nakayama, who's in my book. And so I tie it all together now with the show, the book, so PR mixes in, it all kind of ties together.
Yep. It's awesome. Okay. Well, you said Chefwise. So let's just get the elephant in the room out of here. Let's talk about Chefwise.
Okay.
Can you just give a little 50,000 foot overview? What is the book? And then we'll get into a bunch of questions I have.
The book, Chefwise.
There you go.
So the book came about, and I've talked about this now in some other interviews. So it wasn't my idea to do a book on chef advice. It was actually my publisher's idea, which is Fiden.
Fiden,
yeah.
Right?
So
Fiden.
I say Fiden. So I think that's, I've heard it both ways, but
I'm sure you're right and I'm wrong.
So I was talking to an editor at Fiden about some book ideas and my interest in doing a book. And they had this idea to do a chef advice book. And that's kind of how it came about, or the conversation started, where the editor, it's Emily Takutis, if anyone knows Emily.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, we're friends, and she's been on my podcast. That's kind of how our friendship started. Well, we knew each other through the industry, but she planted kind of the seed. She connected me with Amelia Taragni, who's a publisher at Fiden, who's based in London, and it was Amelia's idea to do this book. And she put us together and we clicked, and I immediately got the idea, the concept, and kind of put together an outline of, and kind of ran with it, like what the book could look like. And that's how it came about. It wasn't the traditional way of getting a book. I didn't have an agent. I just kind of got in kind of the back door. So, and I was immediately drawn to it and interested in doing the book because it just, as you mentioned, like everything kind of ties together with me, and it just kind of seemed to make sense with my career and my relationships with chefs and my love for the industry and my travels around the world, mostly solo, to different destinations where I'm always seeking out restaurants. So I knew a lot of chefs, and it just seemed like a natural fit for me to be doing a book where I'm reaching out to chefs and getting their advice about life in the industry.
This podcast is brought to you by Mies, the culinary operating system for food professionals. As a chef and restaurant owner for the past 20 years, I was frustrated that the only technology that we had in the kitchen was financial or inventory software. Those are important, but they don't address the actual process of cooking, training, collaboration, and consistent execution. So I decided if it didn't exist, I'd do my best to get it built, so the current and next generation of culinary pros have a digital tool dedicated to their craft. If you're a chef, mixologist, operator, or generally if you manage recipes intended for professional kitchens, Mise is built just for you. Organize, share, prep, and scale your recipes like never before, and get laser-accurate food cost and nutrition analysis faster than you could imagine. Learn more at www.getmise.com. Nice. So the book is essentially just, I don't know how many chefs it is, 150?
117.
So there's 117 chefs, and it's their advice on cooking and life. It's interesting getting life advice from us chefs. How much of those conversations were you traveling to them, and how much were just, calls like this, where you're on a Zoom call or something like that?
The book is 14 chapters, and it's not a cookbook. There's no recipes. There's no photos. It's more of a businessy sense, kind of understanding of what it takes to be a chef type book. So there's chapters on philosophy and sourcing, and there's a cooking chapter, teamwork, inspiration, work-life balance. So that's kind of how the book's divided. And the way I approached it was, the goal was to have over 100 chefs. So I put together a long list of chefs around the world, and then I started outreach to them, mostly by email. And once they were committed, I then personalized questions for them. I didn't send every chef the same topics. Knowing a little about them and also trying to fill chapters in the book, I gave each chef like a handful of questions, kind of guide them into what advice they could share. I left it very open to them to like how much they wanted to share, and they didn't have to answer my questions. I had Paul Carmichael, I don't know if you know him. He was in New York.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so
Yep.
he's in the book, and he's now based in Sydney, Australia. And I reached out to him, and he was on board to be in the book, but he didn't answer any of my questions. He sent me his 10 chef commandments, and
Nice. That's cool.
most of the chefs kind of used my questions as guidelines. Most of it was written responses where they wrote anywhere from 100 words to 1,000 words. But I did also do some Zoom interviews or WhatsApp interviews, or I received some voice memos. I know you did before, even on the show. Wiley, like, he recorded it by voice memo. So however I could get the information.
Very cool. That's smart. It reminds me so much of, I think I mentioned this to you, this book, Tools of Titans by Tim Ferriss. A very similar premise. If you aggregate all the insights you got, any big takeaways that you walked away with, learnings that were sort of common threads?
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of common threads between like the importance of teamwork. I mean, the work-life balance chapter was interesting too, because something probably 10, 15 years ago, I don't know if that would have been in the book or been talked about as much, because typically working in restaurants, you didn't talk about work-life balance, but that, like, an understanding of that.
Not unless you wanted to get shamed.
Yeah, exactly. That's like something newer in the industry. But there was, I think, what was cool about, a lot of things cool about it. One of the things cool about it was I was talking to chefs from Dubai to Singapore to Los Angeles to all around the world. And there was a consistency in their approach to sourcing ingredients, or them, as I said, like the importance of teamwork. And I found that to be, I don't know, comforting or cool, that, or refreshing, that this is the way most chefs are thinking about how they're running their businesses. And it is a business. That's also talked about in the book a lot too. Like, I asked the whole chapter on business, and I asked some chefs about like the importance of P&L and profit loss, and like understanding that. And so I think that was one takeaway, just that there is a consistency of like an approach of how chefs view running their restaurant as a business. And also, if I had to pick one like overall underlying message, is It's hard. It's a hard industry to be a part of, which I knew, and I know you know too. But you got to get into it for the right reasons, which is that you're passionate about it. And it's kind of like, I feel so many chefs that I talk to in the book are just, it's like they couldn't do anything else. Like, this is what they have to do. They have to be a chef. They have to have a restaurant. And that's why they do it, like, for the love of it. And I don't think anyone, I don't know if TV has changed this a little bit, but being like an Insta success or like overnight success, like all the chefs in the book worked like a long time to get to where they are today. So it's an overnight success. That's what I was thinking of. I think they share very open and honestly failures, mistakes, things that have happened along the way that led them to get to where they are today. But they didn't become leaders in the industry or where they are just like from one thing. It took time.
Yeah. I think a lot about the attributes of being a great chef because it's actually how we think about hiring at Mies. I have a filter when we're looking for any new team member, especially in the leadership world, but really anybody, because there's these attributes of any great chef, like the ability to prioritize, the ability to, like having discipline, being detail-oriented and organized. Obviously, mise en place is everything. And like, obviously, you have to be fiscally responsible. You have to create profitable menus. And all of them are really hardworking. And they're all obviously like creative and passionate. And like, these are like the recipe of just an incredible entrepreneur, incredible like team member, like anybody that's like working in a business. And that's why it's so interesting, because the attributes of being a great chef actually carry over to so many other industries, sort of universal. And we get asked often, I was going to ask you this as well, just because so often I get emails from chefs saying, hey, I'm thinking about doing something else, right? I've been doing this for 20 years. I'm on my 15th restaurant or something. I'd like to do something else. And I'm like, dude, you could do anything. You have so many skill sets that are transferable. You obviously have sort of, started this whole sort of PR and marketing empire, but there's so many transferable skills. That's what I love most about seeing your book is, yes, you see the importance of like how they cook and how they think about sourcing and things like that. But underneath all of that is how they address problems, how we think about prioritization, how like the discipline that's needed, passion that's needed. Life balance is very new, but actually I think what has sparked so much like more incredible food is because chefs now realize like, hey, I need to have a life outside the kitchen if I want to actually be more creative to my food and to my business and the creativity in my menu, because otherwise I'm sort of just myopically focused on this kitchen and I don't think about the outside world. And I think that's been a great change. But I think for me, that's what I love when I sort of are reading through your book is like hearing these insights from the chefs. It's more than just how to be a great chef. To your point, they're transferable to so many other things. So I'm really glad that you got it together. It must have not been easy to get all, chefs to get all this insights to you too.
No, thank you. I mean, I think anyone who loves chefs in the industry will get something out of it. But I definitely think there's a lot of life lessons. I mean, it's life lessons in the subtitle. But I think anyone, and you don't necessarily have to be in the hospitality industry or culinary industry to get something out of it. I think chefs talk that it is a more business sense minded book. And I also tried to have a diverse list of chefs and different styles of restaurants and cuisines. So there's a lot of best of and James Beard Award winning World's 50 Best, Michelin starred restaurants in the book, but there's also fast casual and different levels of service. And because I think hearing the perspective from leaders in the industry doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a white tablecloth restaurant with 3 Michelin stars. So I tried to mix that up and have just different voices.
Yeah.
There's a lot of information in the book. I mean, it's and I'm just honored and grateful that the chefs were so willing just to be a part of it, because I mean, yes, it was getting responses from chefs could be very challenging and there was follow-up involved, but overall the response was amazing and people were just eager to be a part of it. And I think people had a lot to say and, wanted to share their advice from what they've learned over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. What are your thoughts on James Beard Awards, Pellegrino 50 Best. Like, have you seen that change over the years? And anything that you think are like opportunities to improve it or move things forward? You mentioned that, for example, fast casual restaurants are sort of in a different conversation than James Beard type restaurants that are white tablecloth, meaning like something like Franklin Barbecue isn't associated with, James Beard, or even something, like Velvet Taco, delicious, scaled taco concept. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I just was thinking like J.J. Johnson's in my book, and he has Field Trip, and he was nominated last year. He was a finalist of the Beard Awards. So I feel they are covering, and this year I was there, and I feel there are more casual places or independent places that are coming up on the list. So my take, I mean, it's always, I guess, evolving, but I like supporting the industry and celebrating the industry. So I've been covering the James Beard Awards. I just did my third time on the red carpet doing interviews, and I've been going as long as I can remember. It's another way to share stories and celebrate the industry. And I went to the world's 50 best for the first time this year as well. And that was exciting for me because so many chefs in my book were there, and I got them to sign my book, and I got to meet.
Did they all sign one book?
So yes, this is my one. Look at this. That's Massimo. I mean, I was carrying this around. I've got all these signatures. Virgilio Martinez, who was the number one restaurant in the world's 50 best this year. He signed the book, and I did an interview with him on my podcast. So yeah, I have one very special copy.
It's so evident how much you working with these chefs and talking to the chefs. It just like exudes out of you when you're talking about it.
Thank you.
One more question for the book, and then I want to ask you a couple of things. Who's the audience? Who should be reading this book? What do you want them to get out of it?
Well, I think any young cook, chef, anyone interested in learning more about the industry, I think this book is certainly very valuable to them, and they'd get a lot out of it. Or if there's someone's thinking about getting into the industry or opening a restaurant, I mean, this is like read this book. You'll know what you're getting into. So certainly that's the audience. I think anyone who's a foodie, a food lover, or someone who's followed along with Anthony Bourdain's sort of career and just watches Top Chef and, is just interested in chefs and restaurants, I think we'll get something out of it. I think there's different ways you can read the book. You can read it from cover to cover. You can just open up to any random page and read a couple excerpts and maybe come away from that and just be inspired by that bit of information from a chef. You can look up in the back of the book in the index, like a specific chef, like a Dominique Crenn or a Wiley, or, or even if you want to look at the chefs who are in Copenhagen, or, so you can kind of piecemeal it in getting your information and look up what they have to say or specific chapters. I think it's like an inspirational business sense book. And so I think people in any industry can get something out of it, especially like entrepreneurial type people.
Cool. Well, we'll make sure we put in the show notes all the places that you can find the book.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to wrap up here in a little bit, but I had a quick question. What is La Dame de Escoffier? I believe you're part of this organization, and I don't know a ton about it. I wanted to just curious.
Yes, I am a member. I became a member in 2010. So it's a women's organization that has multiple chapters around the world now, but New York was the first one established. It supports women in the hospitality industry. I mean, it's leaders in food and beverage and aspiring younger people in the industry when they become a part of it and supporting their careers. So the organization focuses on education and advocacy and networking, and that's like part of the mission and the programming that's goes about throughout the year of how we support each other. But basically, you need to apply. When I became a member, the requirements were a little different, but I had to get sponsors to sponsor me to become a member, and you have to have a certain amount of experience in the industry. And it's like an application process to become a member. And then, like any organization, there's annual dues, and like as a nonprofit and being involved in running the organization, it's pretty much based on a member-supported organization. But it's been a wonderful organization to be a part of as a woman in the hospitality space, and people are very supportive of one another. So I don't think I define that at all the way the textbook is supposed to define it. But
No, it's great. That is what I assumed when I took a look at it, but I figured I would ask you just to get a little more color on there. So wrapping up, I want to do a little bit of a Shari Bayer style outro, which is you are a bit of an expert on solo dining. So I'd love to get for the audience some tips on how to do it well, right? And any restaurants that you think of that are like really, really servicing really well if you want to go out for like a solo dinner, which by the way, I love doing as well. I haven't been able to do it in a while, but I love like sitting down at the bar or I think one of my best food experiences ever was many, many years ago. We were working at Belay and we closed for a week to get a new Multaney stove, and I ended up flying to San Francisco to eat a bunch of restaurants. And my first day there, I ate by myself at the 5th floor when Laurent Gras was there. And I still remember that meal to this day. And being by myself, I was able to enjoy it so much. It's such a different experience. So I'd love to hear tips, tricks, any thoughts you have on that. And then any restaurants that come to mind, they're like, and maybe we can stick to New York City since that's your home base of like, you're like, you have to go here if you're going to do a solo.
I go everywhere myself. So I think solo people you can go anywhere yourself. That's my advice. I don't know why solo dining intimidates so many people. I don't think it's really scary. It's fun. You can meet people or you can not meet people, and you can just have your own, enjoy the meal. And I started traveling and dining a lot by myself just from my lifestyle and wanting to go places. And, you can make plans with other people, but it's very easy to just spontaneously pop in somewhere or make your own reservation for one. So, and the more I did it, the more I realized how enjoyable it was, and how I think the one thing with solo dining, I like tasting menus for solo dining because there's a lot happening. There's a lot of courses coming. There's a lot of interaction with the staff, and there's a lot of dialogue even sometimes I just went out to Chile and went to a couple of chefs my book are there, but Rodolfo Guzman's Barago, I went there solo, and chefs are coming out from the kitchen. Different cooks are coming out presenting dishes. There's a lot of interaction. And I find when you're solo, you can really focus on the experience and enjoy every moment, and really is like savor the food, but also learn about what inspires these chefs to do these different dishes. And so I think when you're with someone else, a lot of times you're focused on the other person and you're distracted. But when you're by yourself, you can really take it all in. So I suggest doing a tasting menu restaurant for people, which probably no one, the easy suggestion and also a great one is go to a bar, go to a chef's counter. You just blend right in, and there's entertainment, whether you're sitting in front of a bartender or I love sitting at a chef's counter. Those are, you watch the action, you can sometimes talk to the chefs, and you might be around other soloists or other people who might want to chat with you. So between those two, I'd say, if you're starting out like a bar or a chef's counter, but keep in mind, tasting menus can be amazing. I was curious. I went back and tried 11 Madison Park, the new vegan menu. Maybe it was sometime last year, but that was like, I went solo. Solo diners get really wonderful treatment too, a lot of times, because I think the restaurants that I guess get it, like they realize a soloist is making the decision on their own to come there. There's no other outside factors. Someone who's coming on their own is like, they're there because they want to be there. So I wanted to be there. And I think I'm jumping all around here, but also sushi restaurants or omakase is great solo. There's so many amazing places in New York.
Yeah.
But
so it sounds like your go-to is any place that does like a tasting or an omakase, which I get because I think the one issue with solo dining, at least for me, because I'm a freaking glutton, is I want to try a lot of things. Why I like, have, the best part about having the guests there is like, we get to try a bunch of the things. we can order 4 appetizers instead of 1 and, 4 entrees, and then we can kind of pass them around and whatever, some mid-courses and things. That's a good point. If you do a tasting menu, you get a little bit of each of them. Obviously, it limits the restaurants.
But I guess those are, in a sense, more the special occasion type places. I mean, I go out a lot. Some places, I think the most challenging are the places where your dips and the hummuses and the large format restaurant.
Oh, yeah.
That's hard to do solo.
But tapas is probably good, too.
Where?
Like tapas restaurants. Hop over to like Chiquito or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think anything, I don't know, you can do some small plates. I mean, recently that's open, like I went into Liberty and I was at the bar and I had a couple small plates. I mean, I think you can really do anything solo, and you can always have leftovers too. And sometimes when you're solo, you can make friends with the people around you, and next thing you know, you're sharing plates with them.
Yeah, I've had that a few times. Very cool. Well, sure, this was awesome. So stoked that you got to come on and talk about the book. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you want to shout out, or anybody or anything that you want to, shout out to the world?
Wow. I feel like I've just jumped around, but no, if you want to check out the book, it's Chefwise Life Lessons from Leading Chefs Around the World, and using the hashtag Chefwise book. And I mean, probably putting this on all your notes, but you can follow me and my show, All in the Industry. And that's at All Industry on Instagram. And my PR company is Bayer Public Relations, and that's at Bayer PR. And yeah, it all just ties together. It's like kind of hard for me to separate my life, but I obviously am passionate about all of this, and I appreciate this opportunity to talk about my career with you. So congratulations on everything you've done with me. It's amazing.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And I appreciate the support. And it was really great to catch up. So with that, thanks so much. I'm sure we'll be chatting again soon anyways. But this was great.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning into the Mies podcast. The music from the show is a remix of the song Art Mirror by an old friend, hip-hop artist, Fresh Daily. For show notes and more, visit getmees.com/podcast. That's GETMEEZ.com/podcast. If you enjoyed the show, I'd love it if you can share it with your fellow entrepreneurs and culinary pros, and give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. Keep innovating, don't settle, make today a little better than yesterday, and remember, it's impossible for us to learn what we think we already know. See you next time.